former President Donald Trump has been indicted for the fourth time, this time by the state of Georgia, on charges he and 18 others engaged in a criminal conspiracy. They're accused of trying to undermine the results of the 2020 election in Georgia, the state Trump lost by nearly 12,000 votes. This indictment is on state charges, which means if he were to be convicted, he could not pardon himself. Nikole Killion is following it all at the courthouse in Atlanta. Nikole, good morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Wendy. And District Attorney Fani Willis has asked all 19 defendants to surrender within the next 10 days, and she wants to try all of them together. This sprawling indictment lays out an alleged criminal enterprise, citing criminal acts here in Georgia and other states.
A grand jury in Atlanta returned an indictment that alleges former President Trump and 18 other defendants knowingly joined a conspiracy to unlawfully change the outcome of the 2020 election in the state of Georgia.
The defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
The indictment was handed up before cameras Monday night after the grand jury heard from a series of witnesses. It culminates a 2.5-year investigation by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis.
The indictment includes 41 felony counts and is 97 pages long.
The indictment charges 19 people, including Trump, his former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former lawyer Rudy Giuliani, conservative attorney John Eastman, former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, and several other Trump allies. The former president is facing 13 felony counts, including violating Georgia's RICO Act, a racketeering law used to take down major crime organizations.
There's no way we lost Georgia. There's no way. That was a rigged election.
The investigation was first sparked by this January 2021 phone call where then President Trump asked Georgia Secretary of State Republican Brad Raffensperger to find the votes to win him Georgia. Trump has repeatedly defended the call and denied all wrongdoing.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Rudy Giuliani is one of the defendants accused of racketeering and conspiracy for making calls to pressure local officials and making false statements about election fraud before legislative committees.
I don't have to be a genius to figure out that those votes are not legitimate votes.
His lawyer called the indictment a book of lies.
I consider this very unfair, very unjust toward me, but much worse toward my country.
The indictment also accuses several defendants of harassing and intimidating Fulton County election worker Ruby Freeman to falsely confess to election crimes. She testified before the House January 6 Select Committee last summer.
Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you?
In a statement, Trump's legal team accused the DA of trying to force through and rush the indictment.
We look at the facts, we look at the law, and we bring charges.
According to the Fulton County Clerk's Office, a fictitious document was posted online Monday that appeared to reveal the charges against the former president, but it was quickly taken down. The DA didn't comment, but said it's an issue for the court. Wendy?
Nikole, as we mentioned earlier, the district attorney is seeking a trial date within the next 6 months. With so many defendants, does that seem possible?
You know, it is ambitious, and the district attorney has made clear she wants to move quickly on this, but she acknowledged that ultimately this will be up to a judge. She said it didn't matter to her if she goes first or last, considering, you know, there are other trials pending, given some of the other charges the former president faces in other cases. But at the end of the day, she just wants to move in an expeditious manner.
And what about the timing of all of this? Why did it come so late in the day? Well, the night, really.
Yeah, almost overnight, which was a little unusual. But look, this was a process that had a lot of starts and stops. We know that the district attorney had been planning to make her presentation to a grand jury this week, but things ended up moving along much quicker than expected, so much so that some of the witnesses who were subpoenaed to testify, some were due to come in today, but actually ended up coming in yesterday because things were progressing along. And so so by late yesterday evening, we reached a point where the jury had reached a decision. The indictment was unsealed. I think, if anything, what took the longest period of time was simply waiting for that indictment to be filed and made public.
So the big question, what happens next?
So what happens next is, as we laid out, the district attorney has issued arrest warrants, and she's calling on these defendants to voluntarily surrender within the next 10 days. So that means 19 individuals, including the former president, who will have to come here to Fulton County to be processed. Now, the logistics of how that all will work remains to be seen, but the sheriff has said that the former president and these defendants will be treated just like anyone else, and potentially could get mugshots as well.
Nikole, you had a very long night last night, so thanks so much for joining us this morning.
You bet.
For more on how this fourth indictment could affect the former president, Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from Washington. How does this Georgia case fit into the broader events around January 6th, Robert?
Good to be with you. When you think about Georgia, it's important to see the context here, that Georgia is not an isolated story. It's part of this broader narrative of what happened after the election in 2020, between November 2020 and January 2021. In brief, former President Trump, then President Trump, and his allies wanted to try to stay in office. And to do that, they began to come up with a plan that involved getting different states to send so-called alternate electors or fake electors to Washington so they could be considered by Congress on the congressional certification day, January 6, 2021. So Georgia, when you think about it and you read about it, is really a microcosm or Cliff Notes version of what was going on behind the scenes. Trump and Giuliani and others pressured election officials, state Republicans, to do anything they could to provide Trump with the cover that the election was somehow, in a false claim, rigged. And by making that claim and having so-called evidence to back it up, they could convince Congress to take a different path and keep Trump in power. So what you're seeing here is an investigation that went on for a long time about all of the behind-the-scenes pushes and phone calls and meetings to keep Trump in office. Ultimately, it was unsuccessful. But this is now an alleged criminal conspiracy in the eyes of the Fulton County prosecutor and in the eyes of the federal special counsel, Jack Smith.
Of course, Georgia is always a big swing state in presidential elections. How does the indictment potentially change Trump's campaign?
First, former President Trump needs to make a decision. Will he show up at the Republican presidential primary debate, the first one of the election season, next week in Milwaukee? This is a debate that's going to take place next Wednesday in Milwaukee, right around the time Trump is now being ordered to appear in Fulton County, Georgia, to surrender to authorities for this latest indictment, his fourth. Trump is the Republican frontrunner and a former president, so we are in uncharted territory when it comes to presidential politics in American history, to have a former president also running for office, also facing these kind of charges in different municipalities, different parts of the country. And so this is going to affect the race first and foremost through the debate, but it's also going to affect the Republican Party. Are they really going to stick with Trump? They have so far in many quarters, but are they going to stick with him through 4 indictments, especially as this all heats up and Trump is bogged down by litigation and court dates?
And talking about the party, we have seen a divide from other 2024 contenders when it comes to how they talk about Trump's indictments, whether they criticize them. How have other candidates and fellow Republicans reacted to this latest announcement?
So far, there's been a bit of a muted reaction from most Republicans. They are not being wholehearted in offering their support for former President Trump because many of them are running against him for the Republican nomination. They're being critical of the Fulton County District Attorney. They want to cast the Justice Department at a federal level and these state prosecutors as somehow politically motivated, aligned against the former president. So that's the Republican talking point you're hearing from many of them. But behind the scenes, it's interesting talking to some of the top strategists for various rival campaigns. They don't like former President Trump. They would like to see him beaten in this nomination race, but they know he remains popular and that his grievances with these indictments resonate with many Republican voters. So you're seeing, publicly at least, a reluctance to take him on in a real direct way as he faces down all of these indictments. And Trump's lawyers have responded and said they're going to keep battling. And they said the events that have unfolded have been shocking and absurd. And they started with that document that appeared online on Monday in Georgia. It seemed to be the indictment before the indictment came down. So you're going to see on a legal front and a political front, total war ahead.
If Trump is convicted, he could still become president if he wins next year. Could he pardon himself in all the cases, and how could that legally play out?
This is going to be so complicated, even for lawyers. You have a former president who is arguing on free speech grounds that he was able to contest the election and come up with different plans to try to stay in office. And so even if he's convicted on a federal level or on a state level, you could see the Supreme Court try to weigh in to try to give some clarity constitutionally to how speech is handled when it comes to election fights. Now, no one's allowed to have a conspiracy that's criminal or make false claims to defraud any institution, including the United States. But you're seeing here a lot of complicated issues that are going to be playing out in court at the federal level, at the state level. And ultimately, when it comes to whether he can pardon himself or not, self-pardons are something that have been discussed. But at this point, Trump's not talking about self-pardoning himself should he win the White House again. That's a hypothetical. It would be something that would be legally challenged and legally debated for a long time.
A lot of hypotheticals at this point. Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you.